There's a reason you know the name Rolex, even if you've never owned one, even if you never will. It sits somewhere in the back of your mind as the watch, the ceiling, the one that means you made it. But how does a watch earn that kind of power? How does a small metal object on your wrist become a global symbol that outlasts empires, wars, and an entire industry collapse? The answer starts with a 12-year-old orphan in Germany who had nothing and an obsession with time. Hans Wilsdorf lost both his parents before he was a teenager. Sent to a boarding school in Coburg, he grew up fast, learned to speak English fluently, and left Germany looking for opportunity. He found it in Switzerland, working as a translator for Kuno Korten, one of the country's biggest watch export firms. It was there that Hans discovered his future. Surrounded by watchmakers, movements, and the quiet precision of Swiss craftsmanship, something clicked. He also made a friend who would change everything. Hermann Egler had just inherited his father's ébauche factory, ébauche being the raw, unassembled components that sit at the heart of every mechanical watch. Egler had the supply, Hans had the vision. All he needed was a market. In 1905, Hans moved to London and co-founded a small company with his brother-in-law, Alfred Davis, who, conveniently, had the money to fund it. The company was called Wilsdorf and Davis. It imported high-quality Swiss watch movements from Egler and sold them to British retailers. Simple model, good product. But Hans had a problem with the product itself. Wristwatches in 1905 were not what they are today. They were delicate, unreliable, and considered decidedly feminine. Serious men wore pocket watches, heavy, dignified, passed down through generations. Wristwatches were a novelty for women at garden parties. Hans disagreed. He saw something no one else was paying attention to. The wristwatch was the future if someone could just make one worth wearing. So he pushed Egler's engineers to build better movements, smaller, more precise, more durable. And when they delivered, Hans turned his attention to something equally important, the name on the dial. He understood instinctively that people didn't buy watches from retailers, they bought names. And he needed a name that was short enough to fit on a watch face in any language, memorable in any country, and easy to say in any accent. In 1908, he registered the name Rolex. Nobody knows exactly where it came from. Hans himself said he tried hundreds of combinations of letters, and that one simply sounded right. What followed was a masterclass in early brand building. Hans wasn't content to just sell good watches. He wanted credibility, official, institutional credibility. In 1910, Rolex received the Swiss Certificate of Chronometric Precision. 4 years later, in 1914, it became the first wristwatch ever to earn a Class A precision rating from the Kew Observatory in London, the gold standard of timekeeping accuracy at the time. Then came the war. World War I changed everything. Soldiers in the trenches couldn't fumble with pocket watches while under fire. They needed their hands free, and a watch on the wrist was suddenly not just practical, it was tactical. Rolex became a favorite among officers and enlisted men alike. The brand's reputation for quality spread across the front lines of Europe. But success brought complications. The British government, strapped for wartime funding, slapped a 33% import duty on all luxury goods, watches included. Hans's margins collapsed. In 1919, he made a decisive move, relocating the entire operation to Geneva and reincorporating as Montrez Rolex SA. The company had survived its first crisis, but the next challenge, the one that would define Rolex forever, was already taking shape.
By the mid-1920s, Rolex was a respected name in Swiss watchmaking, but Hans Wilsdorf was restless. Precision wasn't enough. Durability wasn't enough. He wanted to solve a problem that had plagued every watchmaker since the beginning: water. Moisture is the enemy of mechanical movement. One drop in the wrong place, and hours of delicate engineering is ruined. Waterproof watches had technically existed since the 1850s, but they were custom-built curiosities, never a commercial product. Hans decided to change that. In 1926, Rolex released the Oyster, the world's first commercially available waterproof wristwatch. The engineering solution was elegant in its simplicity, a hermetically sealed case with a specially designed crown that could be screwed down tight against the case to prevent any water from getting in. The crown, that small pin on the side of the watch you used to set the time, had always been the weak point. Egler's engineers turned it into a fortress. But Hans knew that announcing a waterproof watch wasn't enough. He needed proof. And that's where Mercedes Gleitz walked into history. In 1927, Mercedes Gleitz became the first British woman to swim the English Channel. It was a monumental achievement, except that almost immediately, doubt began to circulate. Rivals questioned her claim. Newspapers ran skeptical headlines. To silence the critics, she agreed to swim it again. Hans Wilsdorf reached out and offered her a Rolex oyster to wear during the attempt. She swam for over 10 hours. The English Channel in October is brutal. Cold, choppy, relentless. She came within 7 miles of the French shore before the Coast Guard pulled her out, exhausted and hypothermic. The watch was fine. Rolex took out a full-page advertisement in the Daily Mail the very next day. The oyster, it announced, had survived the swim in perfect condition, still ticking, still accurate. It was the world's first celebrity watch endorsement, and it worked exactly as Hans intended. He didn't stop there. In 1933, Lord Clydesdale wore a Rolex when he became the first man to fly over Mount Everest. In 1935, land speed record breaker Malcolm Campbell was wearing one when he crossed 300 miles per hour for the first time. In 1960, a Rolex oyster was bolted to the outside of the Trieste as it descended nearly 36,000 feet to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest point on Earth. Every achievement, every extreme, every first, there was a Rolex. Meanwhile, Rolex was also solving a different kind of problem, the one that annoyed every watch owner every single day. In 1931, the company introduced the perpetual rotor, a self-winding mechanism that used the natural movement of the wearer's wrist to keep the watch wound automatically. No more daily ritual, the watch wound itself. Hans also thought about the future. Rolex was becoming a luxury icon, but luxury had its limits. Not everyone could afford the top of the line, and Hans didn't want to leave the upper middle market to competitors. So in 1946, he created a second brand, Tudor. Same Swiss quality, similar reliability, lower price point, a gateway to the Rolex world. Hans Wilsdorf died in 1960. He left no heirs. The company he built from nothing, the name he invented on a whim, the watches he engineered into icons, was transferred entirely to the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a private charitable trust. Rolex has been owned by that foundation ever since, with all profits going to charity. He could not have chosen a more fitting legacy for a man who started with nothing. But the world his company was about to face would test everything he had built.
Hans Wilsdorf died just as the most dangerous moment in Swiss watchmaking history was beginning to form on the horizon. In the late 1960s, a team of engineers in Japan made a discovery that would nearly destroy an entire industry: the quartz oscillator, a tiny sliver of crystal that vibrates at an extraordinarily consistent frequency when subjected to electricity, turned out to be a near-perfect timekeeping mechanism, far more accurate than any mechanical movement, far cheaper to produce, far easier to mass manufacture. The Quartz Revolution had arrived, and it hit the Swiss watch industry like a flood. Japanese companies like Seiko began producing quartz watches by the millions. American brands followed. Suddenly, a watch that cost $5 kept better time than a Swiss movement that cost $500. Consumers didn't care about the romance of mechanical engineering. They cared about accuracy and price. The Swiss industry, which had dominated global watchmaking for over a century, collapsed. By the early 1980s, more than 2/3 of Swiss watchmakers had gone bankrupt. Employment in the sector fell by half. Entire towns built around the craft of watchmaking emptied out. Rolex should have been finished. But Hans had built something that quartz could not replicate, a brand that people didn't buy for accuracy, they bought it for what it meant. A Rolex was never just a timekeeping device, it was craftsmanship, history, status. Each watch takes over a year to produce from start to finish, assembled largely by hand with tolerances measured in microns. Rolex does not outsource. It does not cut corners. It controls every component of production in-house, from the smelting of its own gold alloys to the polishing of its own dials. That level of obsession cannot be replicated cheaply. A mass-produced quartz watch can tell you the time. It cannot tell you a story. Rolex leaned into this distinction completely. While other mechanical watchmakers panicked and pivoted, Rolex held the line. It continued producing mechanical movements, continued refining its designs, continued building its mythology, because it understood that its customers weren't buying function, they were buying meaning. The strategy worked. By the time the Swiss industry recovered, rallying around a new wave of affordable quartz watches through the Swatch Group, Rolex had emerged from the crisis not just intact, but dominant. Today, Rolex accounts for roughly 1% of all watch sales worldwide by volume, but it represents approximately 1/4 of the entire global watch market by value. One company, 1% of units, 25% of the money. Let that sink in. It is the official timekeeper for Wimbledon and the Australian Open, for the Masters and the Open Championship, for Formula One, for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Its name appears at every event where excellence is the expectation and precision is the point. And yet Rolex has never gone public. It has never sold shares, it has never answered to investors or chased quarterly targets. It is owned by a charitable foundation and operated with a singular 100-year-old philosophy: make the best watch possible, charge what it is worth, and let the world come to you. That's the real secret behind the crown on the dial. The Rolex story is not really about watches. It's about what happens when a 12-year-old orphan with nothing decides to build something that will last forever, and then refuses for over 100 years to compromise on that decision. Not every company that survives does so by being the cheapest or the fastest or the most innovative. Some survive simply by being irreplaceable, by building something so carefully, so consistently, and so deliberately that no one, not even time itself, can make it obsolete. That's what Rolex did. And that small, ticking object on your wrist? It's proof.
And that's the story. If you made it this far, you already know you're exactly the kind of person the Business Lens is built for. So do us a favor, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who'd appreciate it. It genuinely makes a difference in whether we can keep making videos like this one. And drop a comment below. Tell us what company, industry, or business story you want the Business Lens to cover next. Every topic on this channel has come from someone in the comments, so your suggestion might be the next video. We'll see you there.